the Academic Podcast Agency.
Welcome to the Whitetail Stories podcast, a new series exploring why we, as humans, feel compelled to carry out the strange act that is telling stories. Will, how are you today?
I am very, very well. I'm very excited that we've made it as far as episode 3. We're still here, and we're here to share another story with you and reflect upon its purpose, meaning, and future.
Just as a quick intro, I'm Daniel. I am a storyteller, story lover, and director of creative program at the Story Museum in Oxford.
And my name's Will Hood, and I am an audio anthropologist, sometime documentary filmmaker, podcast creator. So, we made it as far as episode 3.
That's a Herculean task.
I think so. It's a hat trick, isn't it? I mean, that's got to count for something.
And I think also if you're listening to this in your pods, earbuds, car, home, wherever you listen, you've made it as far as episode 3, which is assuming you haven't started here. But wherever you've started, you're very welcome.
And today, I believe we are dealing with another trilogy, the last of the 3 stories that Dan and myself made together roughly 15 years ago. And today's story is called Comedy.
That's right. And just to reassure everyone that's listening to this, it doesn't end there. This is just the sort of first chunk of stories. There's more to share. There's more people that we want to talk to as well. So this podcast will be continuing beyond this. So
we're very excited about where we go next after the sharing with you the stories that we've made together. And we've got a number of ideas for guests who are expert and authorities in the realm of storytelling. If you have any ideas yourself, anybody that you'd really like to hear from or that you think would be appropriate for this show, then please get in touch and let us know.
Or if you yourself are someone who is some sort of authority or enthusiast around stories and their purpose in human existence, reach out.
Yeah, maybe you just know a bloody good yarn.
That would be good.
In which case, get in touch, and we'll probably screen it first. But it would be nice to hear from you nonetheless.
No screening. Let's just make it.
Let's just open the gates. Yeah. Let them all in. Okay, so tell us about Comedy, Dan.
Comedy was a piece that was written, so that it was written around the same time as Bully and Moment Catcher. What to say about it? The thing that keeps sticking with me is that it was a dream. I literally had a very vivid dream, woke up and wrote it down, and it almost came out in one go. So that's what we're hearing today. Okay,
so it came to you as if some kind of vision was compelling you to commit this to sonorous story form.
I think that's a bit grand. I don't know if I've been visited by the story gods, but it's it started as a dream, which a lot of ideas do, and I'm hoping we can chat about that process later.
Okay, so let's press play and then see what we think of it after we've listened. Here we go.
And Steve wakes up to find himself sat in a bare white room with his hands bound behind his back, while the hum of the strip lights seemed to soundtrack the air. But Steve's stuck in the centre of this room on his chair. So as he flips his eyelids open in a room on the right, he can see an old man pacing in tears, shaking his back arched in the light. Steve meanwhile struggles to move, but his hands are bound, numb are his feet. I mean, make no bones about this, he's got no choice now but to stay put on his seat. So he starts playing pong inside his head, trying to figure out how he got there. His mind skittles back a week, a month, but still he gets nowhere. Feels like he's pushing against the grain, it's like his whole mind's just blank. It's like the more that he tries to swim to the top, the bigger gets the tank, and then all of a sudden he dismembers and remembers himself in a place far away. To a time when he, aged 7, used to run around and play. Friends by the riverside, laughing to his chest. and snot flew out of his nostril and lying on his back watching cloud shapes. But soon his childhood became a child heart, when his father died from a tumour of the heart. It's hardly the best place for a young life to start.
Stephen hasn't been the same since his father passed away. I think he's taking it hard.
Days on the swing became days on the sink, washing the tears from his face, brushing his teeth like crazy, just trying to remove the salty taste. And nothing seemed to break through to him, nothing seemed to break down his walls. He'd just sit hide enjoying all the lunchtimes in the empty school halls. When he stopped eating his lunch, he began to walk with a hunch, became quiet and introspective. He drew himself from the crowd. He used to be loud, but words no longer seemed effective. He needed direction in his life, and lo and behold, that was what he got. When one evening he was sat there watching the late night comedy slot.
What sort of an angle is it?
Miller corners, and now...
He really does.
Look, Rich, I really hope this is... Haven't you?
Good evening and welcome to the Comedy Hour with special guests Rod Steiger, Michael Johnson, Spanky the Clown, and Ray Murray. But first, your host, Mr. Justin Wild.
Thank you, it really is wonderful to see you all tonight. Welcome, we've got a brilliant evening of entertainment ahead for you. First up, I'd like to introduce you, really, to an inimitable, charismatic, genuine funny man. Please put both your hands together for the wonderful Mr. Ray Murray.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you all. My aunt was very tall. Feet like a couple of lemons, really.
Ray Murray. It was like he turned into humour all the things he went to say. I guess for Steve it struck a chord. Because from that moment on, he'd get home every night and write. Jokes and gags and routines and tales, and he'd just practice them all through the night. It was like the one vent that Steve had to turn his feelings into words, his emotions to verbs, to really make the best out of the worst. To allow himself to poke fun at all these things that had pulled him down. I mean, this wasn't just the case of someone playing the clown, but it had that effect. It lifted his moods, and he began to test material on friends. And something funny always came out when he put the paper down to the pen. And before he knows it, he's winning prizes at school camptown shows. Seems to be getting more confident now, forgetting about his woes, and so it goes. And so he grows till he's flowering at 23. Let's just fast forward it till then. That's a good time to rejoin the story.
And turn it into a children's playground. And hurried across the garden. Some more.
"7 years performing, knows his craft pretty well now. He knows how to get his point across and how to win over the crowd, and every time he performs he finds he's got new things to say. It's like his views on the world just become more acute, his skills grow every day, and audiences grow as he does. Till he's performing 6 nights a week, till people all over the country are queuing up to hear him speak, and speak he does about the stuff, the truth he feels in his heart, about resentment of a nation that seems to be permanently ripping itself apart, and that's the spirit we all just seem to overlook each day. And all this done with panache, humour, in Steve's usual inimitable way, and people were crazy for it, quick to tell him that they were. But he wasn't doing this for his ego, he just wanted to confer truth and make light of situations we all probably bury deep inside. Because if you feel it, why not say it? We only grow when we don't hide.
Crazy man, I'm glad I'm on this roller coaster life. Helps me accept the standards where we ride. Tips, turns, trials, bands, and we ran running through. Hearts keep beaming, guys, have a point of view.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage. Wonderful comedian. He's picking up quite a lot of steam on the new comedy scene.
Put both your hands together
For Stephen Bracken.
You know, I used to work with this guy, who's a short, squat bloke, you know, face like a bag of rats. Stunning Swedish girlfriend with breasts like kittens fighting out of a sack. I couldn't help but imagine him like a little Jack Russell on a leg, you know, this gorgeous woman, his little bloke, his little face dripping with sweat. And then one day he told me, Steve, the secret of it's all, I pulled him close to his noxious breath, he said, is the shaving of one's balls. It makes your chap look bigger, your bit more suck-worthy. My lady met mine last night, he said as he breathed in between his ugly teeth.
Mr. Stephen
The
Bracken.
next time I was at home with just a little too much time, I found my way into the bathroom, grabbed my flatmate's beard trimmers. Now, testicles are funny things, yeah, they're the wrinkled kings of libido. They're not smooth, so you've got to be focused if you want that hair to go.
Welcome to stage, Stephen Bracken.
Mr. Stephen Bracken, ladies and gentlemen. The wonderful Stephen Bracken.
It's only in moments such as these that I really actually begin to realise the true virtues of sitting lotus with a candle in front of my eyes. I'd love to think that I don't need to meditate, you know, that my mind is finely tuned, that I'm an evolved human being just here to share the world's and nations' truths. But the truth actually is that my mind wanders like a dog on heat, chasing steak-wrapped Labradors down winding Spanish streets. I'm cut again. At that point, I peruse the battle sight now that is my crotch. I'd rather leave it half hair, half bald, like legs to the chest of Hasselhoff, than have to end this debacle with something more precious being hacked off. Why can I not focus when there's a divine spirit and benevolent being that actually lives inside of me? You know, we're all at one point in God's big balls, so to speak. I'm cut again. But the truth is, surely each of us hold the potential to wake up to our divinity. You know, we're all at one point in God's big balls.
Stephen Bracken.
Press loved Steve. They loved his fire and his fury. His arrogance and wit was always good proof for a story, and some people went so far as to dub him a genius.
Angry, articulate, a modern-day Lenny Bruce, the future of British comedy seems bright as new hope.
And so all went quiet every time that Steve spoke.
Shh, Steve's gonna say something.
But that's a heavy crown to hold on a neck that's still so young. Becomes easy to confuse where starts asked, where's son? But that's exactly what Steve struggled with, to put it mildly. Truth, he began to think of himself just a bit too highly, you know? Began believing his own press, being arrogant and demanding. Hardly attributes most of us find charming. But charm them, he continued. His audiences grew tenfold as Steve's business sense became just that much more cutthroat.
I don't care who they are. No, I'm not going on without it. No, I want 5 boxes of marshmallows, I told you.
Steve, please, just be reasonable.
No. I want them now. Jed.
You lost your way. You lost your way. Oh, you lost your way. Oh, and it hurts so bad. It's gonna hurt so bad. It's gonna hurt so bad.
Now every night, in every town, regardless of where he'd arrive, Steve would just get up onto the stage and reenact the same set of lines. I mean, word for word, verb for verb, they were the same lines he'd written 18 months ago. And he'd been performing so much recently, it's becoming this weird, slick show. But Steve had been so busy with gigging, touring, travelling, drinking, partying, drug-taking life that he hadn't found a moment in his schedule to sit down and write. But he soon started to get inquiries, from agents and the like, as to when all this material for his new show would arrive. And now when he got a moment between the parties and the gigs, and he sat down, nothing came out. None of his trademark acerbic wit, no one-liners or insights, no tortured prose or political skits, nothing. The paper stayed blank, bar a little bit of scribbling. And so every time that he found the time, he'd just find the time to sit down and try again. And every time, bar none, he just found that the results were the same.
Well, maybe he was thinking about it too much.
Maybe he just wasn't in the right head state.
Maybe he couldn't bring himself to write anything unless it was really, truly great.
Maybe he's just not feeling it. Maybe that's not the case at all.
Maybe he's just feeling the pressure of everyone thinking he's really wonderful. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. Steve sat down to write, and the paper stayed plain, and soon doubt started to fill up the corners of his sphere, where before his arrogance just seemed to act like a veneer, glossing over all the holes in his self-esteem. But as the holes began to show, so too began this recurring dream. Steve was sat on an empty stage, just him and an audience. In his right hand, he was holding a golden balloon. And every time he went to speak, the balloon covered his mouth so no sound could come out. The audience was slipping away, talking, chatting, disinterested now. And then the cry came from the center of the audience.
Tony!
And how they started to laugh. Tears of laughter were pouring down people's face. Steve went to say something funny to win them back, but the balloon covers his mouth again. And again from the audience.
Funny anymore!
And they cried and roared and laughed till their sides were splitting. And in the town, the chatter, the boos, the failure. He tried harder to speak, but the balloon got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, till he couldn't even see the audience anymore. All he could see was the gold. Well, the dream plagued Steve's mind, and every night it came back. And after it, each time he'd wake up sweating in a panic attack. He checked the clock. It would often be dark, and he tried to get to sleep again. But instead he just lay there worrying and waiting till the light of morning came. He seemed to be worried that he'd lost his flow, that he'd become a fake, a show, that his talents were something he'd had to forgo, that there was nowhere he could grow. But the more that he worried, the less he was able to write. And the less he wrote, the more he worried, the more the dream came back each night. And the more the dream came back, the more he spent the days fatigued. And the more tired he became, the less he felt rooted in reality. Steve started to crave anything, to ground, distract his mind. Drinking binges became more regular, for longer bouts of time, sometimes starting early mornings, when the fears first crept in, and he began to accept anything that was offered up to him. Hallucinogenics, uppers, downers, one-night stands with willing fans, snap decisions, televisions, spending sprees and speeding vans. Through all of this, the paper stayed blank, so his demons made themselves comfortable as the dream kept coming back.
Steve, we've got a big night ahead of us. There's a lot of talent bookers in the audience. We're really going to need you to be on the ball, 100%. Steve, look me in the eyes. Say, I am a star. A wonderful, wonderful star. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stephen Bracken. I used to know a guy, short squat. Sorry. I used to know this bloke. I used to know a guy. You're not even funny. I don't know what's the matter with Steve.
Wow.
It's epic.
It's quite dark, isn't it?
It
I've
is.
sort of forgotten it.
It's super dark. It's super dark. The whole thing, especially sat here listening to it with headphones on, it's really quite claustrophobic, right? All the sounds are very close, and there's just those crowds, that sense of panic. You know, even when he's a young kid, there's that sense of everyone's looking at me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it really struck me actually what a wonderful job with that one you did on the sound design. It
thanks, man.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, and it kind of feels like a real progression of the work that we were doing around that time. I think the flow was probably Bully, and then we did that piece with Polar Bear, Return, and then that fed into this. But it feels like it sits in a really nice place of creating the world around the score and the story that I'd created, but just adding this other, which is just made it feel like a movie.
Yeah, it's quite cinematic, isn't it? I mean, I suppose, like, in part, that is because I feel like I've heard that story before. And that's not to say that it's not quite original, you know, the way that you've written it. But do you know what I mean? Somehow there's something quite timeless about the damaged and even paranoid comedy genius. That seems like a kind of archetypal character.
Yeah. It strikes me in listening back to it, and I remember that although I mentioned at the start that it sort of came out in a dream, and very much that sort of the first setting of the asylum and the person in the asylum, and then this start of their story of a young man going into comedy did come from a dream. But then I ended up on this kind of quite obsessional tract of researching people like Lenny Bruce and Bill Hicks and those kind of semi-tortured comedians, which all fed into the kind of makeup of the show, of the piece. I don't know, in reflection, how effective I was at writing a piece of comedy that reflected their genius. I'm pretty clear now, hearing it, that I didn't, but I had to go.
No. I think you caught certainly the darkness of it. I mean, both those characters, I don't know an awful lot about them, but I mean, Lenny Bruce he's a heroin addict, isn't he, who ends up ODing when he's trying to take on, is it like it's not defamation's not the right word, but it's like they wanted to censor him, didn't they, for bad language, and so it was a big breakthrough in it's held up as a kind of breakthrough case in free speech.
He was and died very young, and was kind of blazed a trail that has laid the foundations, I think, for a lot of contemporary comedy. It was dark and it was funny, but it was also, it was so brave, it was so human.
I mean, I always think the curious thing with comedy, and perhaps this is as it should be, is that it doesn't tend to age very well. Even the really good stuff, right? And of course there's exceptions to that, but I used to love Bill Hicks, and I still have a huge respect for him as a personality. He was brave. You really felt like he was on the edge, walking the edge. He had this kind of rock and roll persona. But quite often things with comedy, are grounded in a political context or a social context, which doesn't always carry over decades later.
Yeah, I guess so. It's very present, isn't it, by its nature, especially that kind of end of comedy. And you talk about people like Hicks and Lenny Bruce, and they're very much like commenting on the now, on what's happening in their lives, as well as this sort of grander human experience.
As far as within the spirit of this podcast, the why tell stories, I'm fascinated by this idea that the comic, and in all of its iterations, so right back, I suppose, to the court jester, occupies this very unique place in society, doesn't it? In the sense that it can say things, or they can say things that nobody else can, because it's wrapped in the context of comedy, or it's presented as humour. Yet you've got this rather special dynamic where that person is unique in that they can speak truth to power in a way that perhaps nobody else can. As far as why tell stories, do you think there is something unique about the joke, or when something is presented as comedy? Do you think that's a unique type of story format, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a unique type of story format, but I also think there's something universal in it, in that it's wrapping up a message or a teaching or something that the storyteller or story creator or story writer wants to share in a way that makes it digestible. And certainly talking about Lenny Bruce and Bill Hicks, it was very much, there was an agenda there. There was something that they wanted to share, which was either political, societal, in Bill Hicks's case, very spiritual, really trying to push forward the kind of legalization of drugs and those kind of things. So it was wrapped up in this very digestible format that was humour, because people are more likely to accept something through that lens, I think.
Again, trying to address this unique dynamic of the comedian. And to use that kind of archetypal language of the jester and the king, I think the really important dynamic is that the jester doesn't want the crown, right? So if you think about the power dynamic, he can't be king. He's not vying for control or for power because he's a fool, right? He's a jester. Everybody knows that. And I think that's the important thing, is that they present as harmless. By doing so, they can actually communicate very powerful messages. There seems to me something quite important in that.
And it's a massively important role, and it's still something that's there, for instance, as far as I'm aware, in India, that the king still has a fool or a jester, because they're they're traditionally the one person that can say anything. So they can, to any position of power, they can challenge it. And I feel like in some ways, you won't know this about me, but I can speak with some authority because I actually trained to be a fool for a year of my life. I went,
wonderful. I want to know everything about this.
So I went through, I was making these kind of pieces and then making theatre shows, and I went by chance to a training course that was around performers on stage. It was a kind of, I struggled with playing characters, although there's some characters in that piece. And I thought, I need to come out myself. So I went to this workshop, and the person who was leading it is a teacher called Jonathan Kay, who calls himself a 21st century fool. And I ended up, because I became so interested in his technique, studying as part of the first nomadic academy of fools, where we travelled around Europe for 10 months, studying his techniques and then training other people in each of the European cities that we went to.
Wow. How old were you when you were doing this?
I was probably in my early 30s, I think, when I did it. Late 20s, early 30s.
And are there lessons or techniques or even coping strategies that you took from that time that you still use today, I wonder?
Massively, yeah. It's been a really formative experience. It's not something that I consciously use, but it's something that I subconsciously use all the time. It was very much around hearing. So the whole process was you'd go into a space when you're doing a performance, and the first interaction that you have with the audience is very consciously listening to their stories. And then what you do is using your own cast of characters that you've conjured based on your own personality that you observe over a period of time, and create into characters. So the part of you that's greedy, or that's the manipulative parts, you turn them into almost your repository of actors. And then it's an opportunity to reflect back those stories and create some sort of agency for the audience around the decisions that are made in it, and adding a sense of humour and play so that people feel that they can approach their stories with openness in a way that possibly to be too uncomfortable to do otherwise.
It's really fascinating, from an audience point of view. I mean, I think there's still more to be said about the role of the comedian, and that's definitely the dark heart of the story that we've just listened to. But from an audience point of view, there is this huge catharsis that can happen when comedy is connecting and resonating, especially if you're in a large group of people, right? Have you seen, this is making me think of, have you seen the Book of Mormon?
I've never seen it. I've heard of it.
Oh, my Lord. Right. I'm not a fan of musicals, really, as a format. It's something I could easily miss. And most people will be aware that the Book of Mormon, although it is a musical, is pretty out there. But it was a unique experience for me, and a very, very enjoyable one, to sit there with such a huge audience, maybe 500 plus people in that audience, and just hear the most offensive, obscene jokes just again and again, aggressively hurled at you. And I'm not easily offended, but I mean, it was outrageous, the stuff coming off this stage. And there seems to me two things there. One is that I can't think of any other format where that would even be acceptable. But there was also that experience of going through that with everybody else, you know, laughing until you're crying about very sensitive subjects in different contexts. Yet having this huge communal experience. I mean, there was something really special about that I don't think I've ever experienced elsewhere. And the only thing I can say about it, I suppose, of why that would have that effect and why it would be so pleasant, is that there's some kind of like human fundamental that above all else, life is absurd before anything else. Like that seems to be the primary characteristic. I mean, I guess I'm putting that as a proposition as much as a statement.
Sometimes it's difficult when you're in the hardness of life to approach it with humor and to laugh at it. It all becomes so serious, right? And it all becomes yours. It's all, you know, you get lost in the minutiae of it and the difficulty and the challenge of it. And there's something magical, both in terms of the role of the comedian as storyteller, but also the story as a whole, of being able to see to see other sides of it, you know. And there's
and the
something
futility and the nonsense of it, right? And the fact that although we strive to make sense of all these patterns continually, life doesn't actually make sense, right? And just to acknowledge that.
And also the communality of it, that there are things that we kind of, in our own existence, we think is just yours, you know. But then when someone's echoing it on a stage or on a screen or in a book, and you realize that other people are connecting with this too, that it's like, actually, this is quite a universal experience for us as humans. I think Bill Hicks especially had this amazing way of taking quite philosophical ideas and putting them through the lens of comedy to make them feel more digestible and to give people space to reflect and see the kind of, like you say, like the futility and the kind of the absurdity of all these kind of little loops that we get ourselves in.
Yeah. And there's something, by the nature of that, there's something very cathartic about it, isn't it? I mean, and a good joke is a good story, right?
Yeah.
You know, or I wonder, let's pose it hypothetically the other way. Do you think it's possible to tell a good joke without wrapping it in a good story?
I don't know. I'm no authority on this. You know, I'm as you could hear from that piece, I'm definitely not a comedian.
Feet like a couple of lemons. What do you mean? That's hilarious.
Come on. But I think there's some great examples of kind of those kind of shaggy dog tales or those story-based jokes that are very much a short story, you know. And often when I've been teaching storytelling, people are like, well, I can't tell a story. It's like, if you can tell a joke, you can tell a story, because it's you know, they're very similar. And I think the role of the sort of traditional role of the storyteller or the shanache, as it would have been in society long gone, has possibly ended
shanache.
up. Yeah,
tell me that word. I'm not familiar. Is that another way to say shaman?
No, it's the Irish storyteller. So it's kind of within our culture, or this kind of, you know, of the United Kingdom, if you want to call it that. But I think the people who would have taken those roles quite often become, you know, someone down the pub telling jokes or telling you know, great yarns based on their lives. So I think although the skill sets generationally are the same, they possibly morph in different ways, because we're not gathered round a fire, you know, we're gathered round a bar table or wherever it is.
Or over Zoom.
Yeah. The Zoom storyteller. Do you know, it's fascinating, Will, where each of these conversations go, because I came to this having been thinking about this thing of dreams and where stories came from dreams, having found a bit of text that kind of I just thought was fascinating to share. But I'm aware that I might be adding a whole other tangent, that we're kind of going down this comedy route, which is fascinating and I hadn't even thought about.
Well, I think you should share your quote though. Now, if you pulled it out,
I've pulled it out. I've got it out.
Yeah.
So this really struck me. So this is a book that I found in a charity shop when I was living in Devon by a guy called Julian David. And it's a book called Interweaving Symbols of Individuation.
Wow,
and
what a title.
And he is a sort of disciple of Jung. And it's basically, it's a wonderful book. I've never seen it since or before. And I've found out that he lived in that small town where the charity shop was and possibly left the copy in there himself.
Wow. So did, when you say disciple of Jung...
I don't think he studied directly with him.
Okay. He was just heavily read, well-informed of his work.
Yeah, so he was or is, I think he's still alive, a South African scholar who came to, so it says he's born in England, came to Southern Africa to help establish the Centre for Jungian Studies. And the book basically takes traditional African and European fairy tales and then breaks them down into their components of why these things symbolically are powerful to us as humans. And it's a fascinating book. It's not the only kind of scholarly approach to story and why it's important, of course, but it's fascinating to read.
So just before perhaps you read the quote, I just want to a signpost for any audience member. But Jung, obviously contemporary of Freud, early psychoanalysis, but was very much interested in dreams and talked a lot about archetypes. And the basic idea behind archetypes are that is the notion that there's these reoccurring symbols or characters which worked across cultures. This was his hypothesis, that human beings use to make sense of the world. Is that a good way to describe it?
That's a great description. And looping it back, it was also the basis of the full training I did. So there was it was all around archetypes and embodying the archetypes. So there's a kind of this role of embodying these aspects.
And so early theatre very much worked in that way, didn't it? There was I can't remember the name now of is it the Italian tradition where you have the masks with the long noses?
Yeah, Commedia dell'arte, yeah.
Right, and there's perhaps 7 different characters in that, is there? Like fundamental
characters.
Yeah, starting blocks to build your specific characters on.
And part of the thinking around the training I worked on was that if you go right to the back of the stage to the kind of Greek gods and the archetypes, those things are larger than life. They're like individual characters. But as they morph down and move further forward to the kind of theatre, the fourth wall theatre, those things almost shrink and become a characteristic in an individual rather than, this great big balloon-nosed character. It might just be a sort of a way that the person carries themselves in the world. So it was a fascinating process.
Yeah, I bet.
So this quote absolutely floored me because I'm if you can't see, but because obviously you're listening rather than looking, but to my side are huge shelves filled with books of fairy tales and traditional tales from all over the world. It's been a kind of, for the last 20 years, that's been the one thing that I kind of keep collecting and going back to. And then alongside it, this kind of creative process of quite often writing out of dreams, of starting something from a dream because it felt like a kind of quite a deep well to draw from. And he says here, when these stories were told, both teller and told were already in that inner world, the night, and even their days would be infinitely more than our own in that inside of things. It is the world of the dream, and many tales probably started as dreams. Someone had a dream. He or she would take it to the village dream interpreter, who was often the same person as the village storyteller. It was considered a big dream, that is for the whole community and not just for the individual. So it was told and started to journey down the ages, retold, developed a bit, told again, developed again, but always within a fidelity to the symbols, or accretions would drop away. Certainly fairy tales are like dreams. They use the same symbolic language, have the same sort of feel, and the fidelity of the storyteller is the same as the fidelity of the interpreter of dreams. And that notion for me, that these kind of stories, these fairy tales, the kind of everything from the Cinderella right through, that kind of almost line the walls of our subconscious, possibly came from a starting point of an everyday person's subconscious, that it came from a dream that came out, they went and told it to someone, and it became everyone's property, and then got told and retold. And there's something potentially about the purity of that, of our subconscious, of taking these symbols and sharing them, that's meant that they're timeless. And I think that's just I don't know if it's true. It's a hypothesis by Mr. Julian David, but what a fantastic and fascinating concept.
Well, these ideas have to come from somewhere, right?
Right.
They haven't spontaneously, or at least it's as equally as mystical for them to spontaneously come from nowhere as it is to say they were dreamt or created by individuals' subconscious that was then shared with the group. I mean, surely Jung used to talk about the collective conscious, didn't he? This idea of the ether, and that we were all influenced and influencing this idea, which sounds pretty out there in our modern, very secular, scientific-based culture. But I can't really see how it could be any other way. Right. And
it happens quite a lot of people. They say, I've heard it said that the good ideas go to multiple people at the same time. These things are just floating, and who's to say, and plenty of people have said that it is the case, that the writing process itself is not like a dream. I think there's a fascination. We're very sort of bound in the world of mind and the thought, and I thought this up, and all of our kind of IP law and all those things are based on this thing of who's thought it up.
Who owns this thought?
Who owns this? It was my thought. I thought this out and laid it out with my brain, rather than this thing that these things just sort of, they're there. These things are we've got thousands of years of stories that sit above us and around us.
I mean, the fascinating thing about dreams in that context is that although certainly when you try to recall them, when you tell them to a loved one first thing in the morning, I had this crazy dream, and then you try and retell it. And quite often there's this slight gap, isn't there, between what is explainable and what makes perfect sense in the dream world. In the idea that your grandma suddenly turned into an Alsatian or something, and that seems perfectly normal or justifiable in the dream world. Whereas when you then say it out loud, well, of course, it doesn't make any sense. So there's a fluidity to it. It defies the laws of physics and rationality, which you have to abide by in the everyday.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I would agree with that, but I think there's also different types of dreams. And I'm sure we've all experienced that thing of, there are some dreams that are like that. If you've ever written down your dreams that you're like, God, it was so profound. You read it back and it's just kind of nonsensical. But then once in a while, there are dreams that feel like there's something else, that are really narrative. And part of why I loved it. In here, it was considered a big dream. And that's concept that there are some dreams that are kind of big dreams that are more than just a collection of pearls that our subconscious has strung together, and more that's actually something that's ready for sharing, and it's something collective. And, you look back through religious texts and they're full of this idea that things visited people in dreams.
Sure. Well, that's where God presents themselves in many of the big religious meta stories, right?
Yeah.
You're making me think of a lovely story which I'd like to share with you, of my grandma, probably 3 or 4 years before she died. She ended up in hospital, and it was one of those horrible situations where she went in for one thing, and then because she was in hospital, she got all sorts of other things, right? But I was going in to visit her in hospital, and she'd been having, I suppose, these kind of lucid waking dreams. But they were overwhelmingly positive. And there was she was slightly aware that they weren't or couldn't be real, but she was really enjoying them nonetheless. And so I'd go in to see her, and she was saying, "Oh, Will, darling, I've had everybody in here this morning. I've had your grandpa, he's been in here, who had died maybe 10 years earlier. Wow. Roma, who was their dog from years ago, has been here. She was up on the bed. I was feeding her biscuits. It was absolutely wonderful." And a whole bunch of other people, from her life who were no longer around. And so there was an element that she must have known, or she knew that this wasn't true, yet she was genuinely enjoying the experience nonetheless. It was wonderful. So there is something substantial about dreams, isn't there?
Oh, God, yeah.
In a way that I think is perhaps, again, in this secular culture that we live in, we're not encouraged to weigh them with significance in a way that perhaps other times and other cultures might.
Yeah, and exactly. And there's, we have to realize, I guess, there's a context of realizing that that is particular to us, and particular to this time. It's not a universal thing that these things are discounted, and it's, there are plenty of other cultures existing and that have existed that have weighed great importance to dreams, as much as waking life.
Yeah.
And is that something, to think about, that there's something in stories that allows that they are our portal back into dream?
Yes, they validate the dream state, don't they?
And allow us to enter that space again, yeah.
So, I think that's probably reached some kind of natural conclusion.
I think it has.
I always start with these things thinking, what are we going to talk about? And then by the time we end, it's like I could talk for another hour.
I know. Let's not do one of those 4-hour podcasts.
Yeah, no, we're not. And we have to get on with our lives. So, don't know if you want to attempt a signing off.
Thank you so much for wherever you are, in whatever state you're in, for lending us your ears for the last however long. It's always a pleasure to have these chats and to get to share things that have been really just gathering digital mold on a hard drive for far too long. So it's lovely to share them. It's lovely to chat with you, Will. And we will be back. We are going to keep doing this. I think there's too much. We're having too much fun to stop it. We don't know what that's going to look like. We'll put our heads together and see whether we bring someone else in or we play one of the other many stories that we have up our sleeves. We'll figure that out. So just, bear with us.
I'd like to concur with everything that Dan's saying. It's been a real pleasure putting these together. I hope that somebody or all of you out there are enjoying what you're listening to. Please do let us know. You can find us now on all of the podcast platforms. Tell your friends about the podcast if you're enjoying it. Get in touch with us. Let us know what you think. Dan, you're a beautiful human being. I'll see you very soon.
You are too. You're listening at home. You can't see how handsome he is. He's a beautiful man.
Bye, everyone. See you later.